Hello and welcome to another screencast, this time on methods of training. So just a reminder in terms of what the syllabus is asking students to know. So for you guys, you need to be aware of being able to describe each method of training. So it's really important you know the details of each type of training. And not only that, but once you've got the details, you've got that knowledge, then AO2, you need to be able to apply it to specific sports and specific athletes. So which method of training is most suitable for which specific sport? And ultimately, although it won't be kind of really picked up in this lesson, although I'll be setting you some challenging tasks on it, but the next lesson after this, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of each type of training more specifically, so you can evaluate. The exam board do like to ask a question around this. It's normally a longer answer question because ultimately there's more scope to really kind of not only show your knowledge in terms of AO1, but also to provide specific examples and then evaluate by looking at those positives and negatives, those strengths and weaknesses for each type of training. So once again, the yellow text boxes are for you as students as tasks, the green text boxes to make some notes, the blue text boxes are for differentiation, and the red text boxes are specifically for the practitioners, the teachers, in regards to teaching and learning strategies. So, quick scenario for you first and foremost. I want you to think yourself as a personal trainer, and you've been training your client for about a month now, and she's training once a week, as you can see there. She's getting fitter, but ultimately she wants to speed up the process of her progress. So, what advice might you give her as a personal trainer? So, pause the video now and just jot down what advice, what things you might tell her to do. Okay, so you should have unpaused the video now, and we're looking at what advice you'll give as a PT in terms of getting your client to progress a little bit quicker. So here it's really kind of applying those, or specifically the FIT principle in thinking of the frequency. So can she train more than once a week? The intensity, so can she train a little bit harder perhaps in regards to effort, or can she show some progressive overload? And finally, time-wise, so can she train her session for a little bit longer, perhaps? All of those things are going to help in regards to the progress that she's going to make and speeding up that progress. Okay, so I want you to look back. I want you to really think back now to the principles of training and the FIT principle that we've just looked at. And I want you to apply, Pix will do lots of different strategies and things like that. But I want you to think about this thinking hard process in regards to reducing. So I want you to look at each principle. I want you to try and write that down now. If you pause your video in a second, I want you to write down all of the different principles of training and the FIT principle. And just next to each principle, can you come up with 3 or 4 different words that kind of relate to those principles? So this is a couple of quick examples for you. And when you wrote down frequency, you may have written the words increase, you may have written the words training or days or amount. You might have included some other words as well there. But when we're thinking about that frequency, we're thinking about obviously increasing the amount of time, the amount of days that we're going to be training. Ultimately, the same for intensity. You could have used words like amount, effort, weight, and even threshold. So thinking of, can we increase our effort levels, the weight that we might be lifting, and ultimately, when we're doing that, we're basing it around the training threshold that we want to be in. That's going to most suit our fitness components and our requirements for our specific sport. Okay, so let's look at the different types of training then. So let's start with continuous. So ultimately, when we're looking at continuous, we're talking about training that has a minimum of about 20 minutes of sub-maximal work. So here we don't really have any periods of rest. We're looking at our heart rate range to be sort of between 60 and 80% of our maximum. And that's the formula reminder in terms of finding out what your maximum heart rate is, so 220 minus our age. And ultimately, The type of sports and the type of activities we might do for continuous training will be things like swimming, running, cycling, walking, or a combination of these disciplines in essence. But when you're remembering how to think about continuous, just think of that the first start of it. It's nearly like continue. When you continue something, you keep on going with something. So it's working without rest periods in essence. Again, pause the video here, try and answer those questions. So what's the benefits of continuous training in your opinion, and what's the disadvantages? We're going to focus on that next lesson, but let's just see what you know right now. Okay, moving on to fartlek training. So again, here we're talking about a Swedish word. Fartlek is referred to as speed play, and in essence, it's a form of continuous training. So we change the speed, we change the incline, so the height, the incline of how we're running. You can see there a picture of someone sort of running up a hill, and we will also change the terrain, so not always running on the same surfaces. So it could be grass, it could be across country track, it could be an AstroTurf pitch or a playground concrete. So in essence, we change that up to help with our exercise intensity. And hereby we're kind of working both the aerobic and anaerobic capacity and work here. So ultimately we're really kind of suiting all types of performers in essence in regards to fartlek training. Again, just pause your video, try and answer those two questions. So which sport is fartlek training beneficial for, and what are the disadvantages of fartlek training, just to see what you know. Okay, moving on to weight training. So here we've got a form of interval training. So the intensity is measured, as it says, in a percentage of the most weight a person can lift one time, and is known as 1 rep max. So our 1 rep max is us working at 100% of what we can lift, and ultimately the time is structured in reps and sets, and the specific time for recovery between those sets. I think it's important at this stage really that we write also down the definition of repetitions and of sets, and I haven't written that on this particular PowerPoint, but in essence a rep is the number of times you move the weight when training. So that's what we mean by repetitions. When we're talking about sets, on the other hand, we're talking about the number of repetitions you carry out for a particular weight activity without stopping. So that's what we refer to in regards to sets and repetitions. And ultimately, there's a huge range, obviously, of possible lifts and combining sort of weights and free weights and body exercises that can be used during this type of training. Again, pause your video, think about what the benefits are of weight training, what are the disadvantages of weight training. Okay, moving on to interval training. So this is obviously a type of training whereby we have elements of work, exercise, and we have interspersed, so we have set times of when we rest. So in essence, this is obviously useful for a variety of different fitness types and different abilities in people. But in essence, we're kind of structuring our reps and sets. So once we've finished, let's say 12 repetitions of a free weight, an arm curl for better use of an example, and then we've completed our first set, okay, of those 12 repetitions, then we may rest for 30 seconds to a minute. And ultimately this is, again, intensity is measured by the percentage of our maximum heart rate. So a common example here is kind of shuttle runs. So think of in pre-season training for an invasive sport, you may do shuttle runs where you run from one cone back to the start, back to the second cone, back to the start, and then during that period of rest, of once you've completed your set, while your maybe partner goes, or while the other people in the group go, that's when you're getting your rest in. So ultimately it's hard work followed by periods of rest. Again, just pause your video now, think about what the benefits are of interval training and what are some of the disadvantages of interval training. Plyometric training. So moving on now, we're looking at high intensity exercise, which involves kind of explosive movement. So if you've been to the gym before, if you've seen a gym, you've seen that sort of that box jump that the guy is doing on the bottom right here in a diagram, where we're sort of jumping with 2 feet onto the top of the box, and then we're jumping down again. And we're looking at different muscle contractions here, eccentric and concentric muscle contractions, and them kind of working together. The eccentric contraction when we jump down, and then it's providing obviously more of that elastic energy, that pented up energy in our quadriceps, so that we can manipulate our muscles. If we then jump again in quick succession, we provide more energy for that, and that creates that kind of explosive capability in our muscle. Ultimately, this is obviously suitable for well-trained athletes, and obviously it's an effective way of developing power. So you'll see a lot of sprinters, explosive power, like high jump, for example, even long jump, when they're sort of jumping from that board, they're looking at that explosive power to generate that height. Again, pause your video, think about what the benefits are here, what are some of the disadvantages of this type of training. And then moving on to circuit training. So ultimately here we're looking at developing a wide range of fitness components. So it could be muscular endurance, strength, cardiovascular fitness, and so on. And this is a form of interval form training. So ultimately we'll have stations that are set out, as you can see in the diagram below, whereby they're all doing different types of exercises. And after each type of exercise, they will probably rest for anywhere between 10 to 60 seconds between each exercise, and then they'll move on to that exercise, okay, working in a circuit. And in essence, obviously they move, it could be clockwise, anti-clockwise, however it's been set up, but it's looking at really ensuring that we provide a wide range of exercises and developing different fitness components here ultimately. But we can try and make sure that we design the circuit to make it sport specific. Okay, so that's really important to note, that this type of training can be used to make it sport specific. Okay, and then we have to think about what we're doing in each exercise. Is it replicating some of the movements? Is it replicating some of the fitness components that we require in our sport? Ultimately, again, pause the video now, think about what the benefits are of circuit training, what are some of the disadvantages of circuit training, just to see what you know at the moment in regards to these topics. And then we move on to flexibility. So flexibility training, in essence, we're talking about the different forms of stretching, but ultimately this is essential for all athletes across all sports and activities. We need to be flexible. We need to have that range of movement possible at our joints, okay, because that helps ultimately with our technique, with the amount of power we can execute. For example, a fly half in rugby, when he or she is kicking towards the posts as a conversion. Ultimately, they need that range of movement in their hip, okay, to obviously be able to kick further at different positions, obviously on the rugby pitch. And obviously we can apply the concept of time here and thinking about sort of holding our poses, and obviously that aids obviously recovery as well. Again, just pause the video here, think about what the flexibility benefits are to this type of training, what are the disadvantages to this type of training. Okay, so like I said before, I think at the start of the Flip Learning video, in essence, the example would really like to think about this topic as an extended writing question, because there's lots of scope to be able to talk here and get students to evaluate. So I think pause the video, look at the 4 pictures that you can see. You've got a gymnast, you've got a long jumper, you've got hockey, you've got a heptathlete, okay, and I want you to think about what type of training is most suitable for each performer. Okay, so you might just want to plan that, might want to brainstorm it in a mind map, so you can come in with some notes next lesson. And ultimately, the last slide in terms of teaching and learning strategies for the teacher, like I said before, this is an extended writing task topic. So get your students to plan an essay. They could do it in small groups, They could share some of their notes if you ask them to do it for homework. Modeling, if you ask them to actually answer it in class, then share some of those answers together, photocopy some of those answers so students can see what a good example is of evaluating, and then work as a carousel as well, so you can see there the requirements for that as well. Okay, best of luck, folks.